Hi, my name is Tyler Andrews. I am with the Texas Master Naturalists, and I have Chris, Kennedy, Blake, and Frank, who are students of mine at Uplift Summit Preparatory in Arlington, Texas. And we are at the Cedar Ridge Nature Preserve, and we're going to do some water quality testing here. And what we're looking for are macroinvertebrates, small organisms that live near the shoreline that we can scoop up with nets, put in buckets, and then sift through, and by looking at the type of invertebrates that we find, determine what the water quality of this pond is right now. That will tell us what the water quality is right now. That might change depending on if we get rain, depending on what kind of water moves through here. This system doesn't have a whole lot of water flow, so it's not going to change very much. But what we're going to try to do is get a sense for whether or not we have good water quality or poor water quality. And we'll talk about in the next short video what sort of organisms we can find that will determine water quality. And we'll also see some pictures of these guys in action, wading around in the water and scooping up lots of different things, hopefully. Okay, let's get to work. All right. Down here at the water's edge, and Kennedy is using the nets to scrape the reeds because that's where it's easiest to find the macroinverts, because they're going to grab on to the vegetation and hold on in case of bad weather and to hide out. And so what we're going to do is going to scrape the mud and the sediment that's down there, and then we're going to sift through it to see what we might find. So Kennedy right now is looking through his stash right now. You find anything in there, Kennedy?
No, I didn't find anything.
Nothing right yet? And over here, Frank is doing the same thing.
I caught a little bluegill is what it looks like.
What you got?
A little bluegill.
All right.
Oh, you got a fish? Yeah. Oh, wow.
All right. Okay. And then over here, we got Blake and Chris and the waders doing the same thing deeper in the reeds, but it's the same approach. All right, so we're going to see what we find. So we are back here with our findings from our outing at the Cedar Ridge Nature Preserve Pond. We have some canisters with different invertebrates in here. What we're going to do is tell you what kind of invertebrates that we found, and then Blake and Chris are going to specifically talk about what those different species say about the water quality over here. So Frank is going to start by going through the different canisters right to left and what we've got. Frank, tell us what we got in this first one.
So in our first one, we have a predaceous diving beetle. In the second one, we have a common damselfly larva. In the third, we also have a larger predaceous diving beetle. And in the fourth one, we have a common dragonfly larva. And in this one, we have 3 different organisms. In the top, right around here, you can see a common mayfly larva. In the middle, right here, there's a leech. And right here is another damselfly larva. In the large container, we have assortment of snails, sunfish, and crawdads, or crawfish.
Okay, so with that information, Chris, Blake, tell us what this says about our water quality.
So the species we have, such as water spiders and leeches, indicate that we have at the very least low quality water. However, we also have creations, diving beetles, and the nymphs, which indicate that we have medium water quality level.
We also have things such as crawfish and the mayfly nymph, and that indicates a high water quality. And it's important to note, even if your pond or river water sample you're measuring has low quality insects or invertebrates, it doesn't necessarily mean your water sample or the water you're testing is a low quality water. It just means you have the basis for the low quality water, in which you could also have things such as medium and high quality invertebrates.
So the fact that we have such a wide range of species here, and a number of them are highly sensitive to pollution, indicates that this water quality is pretty good. Now, that's right now. We could test this water quality again in a few months and notice some changes. You could test a system at the top of a flowing river, a stream that kind of shoots off of a flowing river, and get a certain water quality testing, and then test another stream that's an offshoot of that same river a little bit further down and get different water quality. But the idea is that you test in different places, you test over time, because water quality is always changing, and what it does is kind of tell you about the health of your wetland. So this is first test over here at the Cedar Ridge Preserve. We'll do this again later, but hopefully you learned a little bit about how to catch invertebrates and what they say about your water quality. Again, I'm Tyler Andrews, Texas Master Naturalist. See you later. I wanted to talk a little bit about the supplies you would need to do the activity that you just saw in the last video. If you were a citizen scientist or if you're a teacher and you want to do this with a class, there aren't very many things that you need, and most of them you might have on your shelf at home. The one thing you might have to buy would be some net scoopers. But let's go over some of these things that you would need to do some macroinvertebrate testing at your local wetlands. I have some Ziploc containers here, some Pyrex containers of various sizes. It's good to have these for when you collect samples from your wetlands. It's also good to have a larger bucket for when you start your collection to dump everything inside of and then divvy it up into the smaller buckets. But between a bucket and a variety of different sized plastic containers, these are all the containers that you would need to store the macroinvertebrates that you might find. Then these types of small nets, which you can get at a pet store, these are usually what you scoop fish out of a fish tank with. Ones that are a little bit stiffer are better for what we're doing because we're scraping the sides of reeds with these nets, and you really want them to be kind of firm. But any nets will do. Even if you had a butterfly catching net, that might be okay. The one thing that you want to keep in mind is that these are macroinvertebrates. They're really small. So if the mesh in the net is too big, then they'll just slide right through it. So we got our nets here. We got our containers here between our buckets and our plastic Ziploc containers. The final thing that you need, and when we were talking about quality of the water based on types of macroinvertebrates that we found, we were using a biotic index for macroinvertebrates that we've put together for one of our local preserves down here in Dallas. This document says Big Spring Preserve at the bottom, and it's got macroinvertebrates grouped into 3 different categories. You see, you have a green, a yellow, and a red here. And what these categories basically say is that if you have macroinvertebrates in the green category, for example, that means that they are very pollution sensitive. So if they exist in your wetland, it means you've got some pretty clean water, because these things wouldn't be around if the pollution were high at all. The yellow category is just for macroinvertebrates that are slightly less sensitive, and the red category is for macroinvertebrates that are very tolerant to pollution and will exist basically anywhere. You can find these worksheets online. If you looked up biotic diversity, water testing with macroinvertebrates, I'll put a link to this document in the bottom of the video, and it could be useful to you, but just know that you're not going to have all the same macroinvertebrates in every wetland system. But when we were talking at the end about looking at different macroinvertebrates and what it says about our water quality, we were basing it off a chart like this. So a macroinvertebrate ID sheet was the last thing that you would need to get this thing up and running. Now the last thing I wanted to say is that the North Texas Master Naturalists have wetlands trunks on hand to use if you're a teacher. If you contact a Master Naturalist, you can get your hands on a trunk like this, and that trunk has everything that you would need. Inside this here, we have lots of supplies for viewing macroinvertebrates and for catching macroinvertebrates, containers that they would go in, ways that you can view them if you really wanted to get down and dirty, and lots of information about how to go about conducting experiments using macroinvertebrates. So the North Texas Master Naturalists have you covered if you're a teacher or an educator of some sort and you want to do this work on your own. But like I said, if you're a citizen scientist, you don't need much to get this up and running, just these few things that we have here for you today. So once again, thanks for watching this video, and hopefully you go out there and learn something about your local wetland area.